What up? My name is Mitchell, and today I'm going to be talking about the new Scooby-Doo movies tier list. Now, some of y'all should be ashamed of yourself for putting out trash content, and I mean that in the most polite way. You motherfuckers be making Scooby-Doo tier lists and not putting any thought or effort into it. You'll be like, oh yeah, this creature is generic and he's a boring tier. And then the next creature will be like the fucking frog monster, and you'll say, oh, he's the best creature ever. You need to make up your motherfucking mind when you make these tier lists, okay? And there needs to be some sort of logic. So I did not practice this. I did not recite any of this. I do have a vague understanding of where I'm going to put these, but by no means am I reading off a script or anything. So let's get into this tier list. And I'm going to start first off by saying that I don't have all the episodes here. There are some episodes like The Addams Family, Sonny and Cher, the one with the sports player, etc. Tom Conway is the guest star. I don't have all the episodes. I just have all the episodes that are in this DVD. And this is the main one that you see. Some of the episodes are copyrighted and you can only find them in certain areas. I'm sure you could buy most of them online now, but this is a condensed version, but it covers most of the episodes. Okay, so we're going to do it by disc. So disc one. First one we have is Ghastly Ghost Town with the Three Stooges. Now, of the Three Stooges episodes, this one, in comparison to the Red Baron, is my least favorite. You would think that it would be a good episode. You're at a freaking haunted amusement park that's owned by the Three Stooges in the middle of nowhere. There's a big ass T-Rex that's terrorizing everybody. But I don't know, the Stooges manager's a dick and he's annoying. And then the crunch guy who doesn't talk is kind of annoying, but interesting at the same time. I do like Dingbat, but overall, this episode just didn't do it for me. And it's the first in the DVD, so you'd think it would come out with a bang, but it was just all right. So it's going in meh. You know, it's okay, but it's not anything amazing. All right, the first Batman and Robin episode called The Dynamic Scooby-Doo Affair. Now this one, in relation to the other one, this is the one that has Mrs. Baker, who's an old woman, and it has the flip or the rotating house. So the highlights of this episode for me are when the gang actually go to the haunted house or the haunted attraction that has the Joker and Penguin, and then they try to capture them essentially. The parts with Mrs. Baker where they're like in the junkyard and then they go to her house and it rotates and then they go underground into her little area. It's pretty boring to me. So I wasn't a big fan of this episode. I really did like the part where they were in this haunted attraction area. This was definitely the highlight of the episode, but this was the only good part of the episode for me. So I'm going to put this one too in May. Okay. The Fricket Fracas with Jonathan Winters. Now look at this generic ass scarecrow ghost. This has got to be the most generic ghost ever. But there were two other guys, the bearded fellows, who they wanted to rent the farm for a rock festival like Woodstock. So the first half of the episode is the gang trying to capture those two and chase them off the farm. So I just ate a ton of spicy food, so you know my throat's messed up. But to put this short, I love this episode. Jonathan Winters with Shaggy works exceptionally well. And this is going in amazing. This is one of my favorite episodes. Shaggy, if you don't remember, dominates most of the chatting for the Scooby-Doo show, just in general. He talks about maybe 60 to 75% of the time. So if you have a celebrity character who works really well with Shaggy, you know the episode's going to be a banger. So this episode, Jonathan Winters, the comedian, is hilarious. He works great with Shaggy. This is just an all-around, I love the environment, the dark farmhouse. It's great. So that's going in amazing. All right, guess who's not coming to dinner? The Don Knotts episode. Don Knotts is another celebrity guest who works really well with Shaggy. He's always funny, whichever role he's in. In this episode, he's a detective, and he thinks, so there's a guy named Captain Moody who owns this manor in the middle of nowhere. And Don Knotts thinks that the gang is Captain Moody's relatives, his nieces and nephews, which is funny because the gang looks nothing like this old rusty ass motherfucker. So the whole time Don Knotts is trying to crack the code. He's playing these different characters. It's really interesting and entertaining, even though it is in that small condensed area and environment. I think that the episode works well and it's cool. So I had a lot of fun with this episode. It is a good time. Don Knotts represent. All right, moving on to disc 2, the Spooky Fog. Don Knotts back at it with another banger. Hell no, the Spooky Fog is one of my least favorite episodes. And I'll explain why. So first off, the gang's driving through a town called Juneberry. This sounds like a fucking retirement home. Juneberry, old ass town. And this is the first place. Usually the gang goes to a place and they're like, oh shit, we gotta solve a mystery. The gang drives through this place and they're like, we need to get the hell out of this boring ass place. I felt the same way. I was just thinking, get me out of this boring town. I don't want to be here. But then Don Knotts straight up lies and trolls these guys to actually go to this town. He says, oh, this town is great. Like we have all the finest restaurants and shit. And they're like, okay, we'll go, whatever. And then they get there and everyone's like leaving town. And Don Knotts is like, got your ass. I convinced you guys to come here and be miserable with me. What more can I say about this episode? The first half of this episode is miserable. They're basically in this small town, but instead of actually venturing around the town and like looking into abandoned places and shit, they're in the sheriff's office or whatever. I don't know what the hell it's called. It's like a local jail. And they're like sleeping behind bars. I felt like I was behind bars in this episode. They didn't do shit for the whole first half. And it's not until the last half where this episode starts to pick up. But by then I'm already checked out. I'm bored. So it's really just the second half of this episode is amazing. The first half is boring. So to find a healthy medium, we're going to go meh. If Don Knotts was not in this episode with his humor and him working well with Shaggy, this would be the most boring episode imaginable. So God, this episode, I'm so mixed about it, but half of it's boring as hell. The other half is good. Take that for what it is. Okay, next one we have Scooby-Doo meets Laurel and Hardy. This is the episode where they're going to this random ski shack in the middle of nowhere. And it's kind of like a Scooby-Doo episode called That Snow Ghost, where there's the ghost of Bigfoot or just Bigfoot. In this one, it's the ghost of Bigfoot. And even though they're in this really small, secluded environment, the small log cabin, they do very well in this episode. I felt like I was on vacation and I was just paranoid and trapped in this location with the gang. And when you could actually invest in the episode and get involved in it, I think that makes a really good episode because you actually see yourself in the shoes of the characters, which is hard. But Laurel and Hardy are funny. They're not the most amazing celebrity guests, but they do well. And I love little nuances in this episode. Like they're in this tiny cabin, but throughout the episode, there's all these like hidden layers and the ghost is walking between these two rooms. And then there's like this big rundown room in the middle of nowhere. How did the ghost of Bigfoot actually create this shit? Like, you know, the owner of the hotel or the cabin didn't make this shit, didn't make these secret passageways. So I thought that was pretty cool. Even though it is like kind of an inconsistency, like the ghost couldn't have made that shit in time. I really like this episode. It's one of my favorites. Okay, next we have the Ghost of the Red Baron with the Three Stooges. This episode is, I at least personally found it a lot more enjoyable than the episode where they're at the ghastly ghost town. And even though they're at an abandoned airstrip, I feel like they actually do really well in this environment. Half of the time is spent them flying around, which is kind of lame, but it makes sense because the ghost is the Red Baron. I really like the Red Baron when he's bouncing around and floating with his little like whatever the hell he's using to float, and he's got the springs in his feet. But they go to like some random ass area in the middle of a field. They hide in this I'm blanking on whatever it's called, but where they store the planes. They like sleep there overnight, and the Red Baron's just scaring the shit out of them overnight. It's just a great environment. And I love when they cut down the door, the gang and Shaggy and Scooby get separated and they end up meeting up. And the way that they meet up is really cool. So I had a lot of fun with this episode. It's not amazing by any means, but there's more good in this episode than bad. And I think the abandoned airstrip is great for this episode. And let me try to make that a little, there we go. So yeah, it's a solid episode for me. Okay, the ghostly creep from the deep. This is the first Harlem Globetrotters episode. And I've got to say, the Harlem Globetrotters are my personal favorite celebrity guest. And there's so many of them that you might have a favorite. You might say like, oh, Curly's my favorite. Or I don't know, Bobby Joe's my favorite. Bobby Joe always cracks me up personally. But I had a lot of fun with this episode too. This is an episode where, as you can see, the ghosts are the ghost of Redbeard and his lackeys, but the Harlem Globetrotters and the gang are in a swamp. And there's this big ass inn in the middle of the swamp that's abandoned. So in the beginning of this episode, the Globetrotters and the gang meet up, they go to this inn, and they get into like a literal fight with these ghosts. And you don't see the gang actually fighting and getting involved often, but the way that this whole exchange went down is brilliant. And I like how there's this giant ghost ship floating around in the middle of the swamp. It makes no damn sense, and I love it. And then the ending of the episode where they actually go to the ghost ship that's hidden behind this gigantic tarp and they capture the ghosts is pretty good. So they only use a few settings in this episode, which I think holds it back. They have the inn and then the ghost ship. If they experienced or moved around more and maybe went through the swamp more or found different types of evidence, I think this would be a really good episode. But this is just going in a good time because it's a great episode, but it's just not on that next level. Okay, the next one we're moving on to disc 3. We have the Caped Crusader Caper with Batman and Robin. Now, this episode is different from the other one because in this episode, the Joker and the Penguin are the main bad guys, whereas the other episode had Mrs. Baker was technically the big bad of the episode, and the Joker and Penguin were just side characters. The Joker and Penguin are the main villains in this episode. So the gang's camping in the forest, and then Batman and Robin are trying to track down the Joker and the Penguin who captured this guy named Professor Flaky. He created this flying suit made out of rubber that can propel you through the sky using compressed air and all that shit. So they're trying to track him, the Joker and Penguin. The Joker and Penguin have this gigantic cave headquarters in the middle of this forest, which is awesome. So a lot of time in this episode is spent in the forest, in this big ass cave system where there's a lot of good stuff. There's like a giant bat that attacks the gang. There's a water monster. There's just a lot of funny scenes in this episode. And then at the end of the episode, they go to the professor's work essentially, where he makes all these like giant floating balloons, and Scooby-Doo gets in the suit and he takes down the bad guys, and it's just a good time. It's not amazing by any means, but I enjoyed this episode significantly more than I did the other one. So this is definitely one of my favorite Batman and Robin episodes for sure. Or my favorite, because there's only 2 of them. Okay, ready for this? This is about to be a bombshell. The Loch Ness Mess with the Harlem Globetrotters. I'm not going to waste any time on this shit. This is my favorite Scooby-Doo episode of any series of all time. And I don't understand why some people have this so low on their list. I think this episode has everything. It has these ghosts, which, yeah, they look kind of generic, but there's also the Loch Ness Monster. There's the Harlem Globetrotters in this episode, which are always amazing. And the whole premise of this episode is pretty funny. Shaggy he has convinced the gang that he's going to go meet up with his Uncle Nathaniel, who lives in this big ass mansion in Boston. And Uncle Nathaniel doesn't even know he's coming. So when the gang meets up with the Globetrotters and they spend all this time finding Uncle Nathaniel, he's like, oh, why the hell are you here in the first place? Oh, to come kick it at your house. So I found that really funny. This has one of the creepiest scenes, I would say, in all of these episodes. But what happens is this guy right here goes to Uncle Nathaniel's house in the middle of the night. He just invades the home and scares the shit out of everybody. Just he walks up and down the stairs. He walks down the halls looking for people. How is that not creepy? This dude's a home invader. That's fucking creepy as shit. So I love that scene. I love when they go to the water and they find the Loch Ness Monster. I love when the gang separates. So Shaggy, Meadowlark, and Curly, and Freddy, and Scooby, they go in the water. The other members of the gang go walk around this campground area where there's cabins, and they're getting chased by these ghosts. And it's just, I love both scenes equally, and they're amazing. This is just an all-time great episode. I can't praise this episode enough, so I'm just gonna leave it at that. All right, and then right after this amazing Harlem Globetrotters episode, we get this episode. And it's called, damn, I'm losing my voice over here. It's called The Mystery of Haunted Island. But this episode should be The Mystery of Some Stupid Ass Shit. Because the gang is stuck on this ship for half of the episode. And this falls into the same trap as the spooky fog, where the first location is really boring. They're in like some cabin and the Globetrotters are playing basketball, and then they go on this ship, and there's a few funny scenes, like Bobby Joe's hanging by one arm and he's like checking out everybody on the ship and giving feedback about what they're doing, and they're doing some kooky shit. That part's funny. The haunted island is interesting. I like the little mansion they got there and everything that goes on. So the haunted island part of the episode is actually really good. It's just the ship part and the cabin part that are kind of boring for me. I do like the basketball scene at the end of this episode. And let me give you a spoiler here. The ghosts in this episode are the coaches of the other basketball team that is supposed to be playing against the Globetrotters the next day. So in other words, let me put this to you logically. And I know it's a cartoon, but still. The ghosts in this episode either hijacked or built this giant ass boat for one basketball game so they can kidnap the Globetrotters, take them to this island that I don't know if they built the mansion there, but they definitely set up all these elaborate scares and shit. Probably cost millions of dollars, cost a ton of time, probably took them years to figure this shit out to win one basketball game against the Globetrotters. That alone is like, what the fuck? Why are they doing that? So it's sad. I know it's a cartoon. I know I'm nitpicking, but for that alone, I just got to put it in meh. You know, it's an okay episode when they get to the haunted island, but the whole premise of the episode just makes no sense. And I can't put that at a good time or amazing for that reason. Okay, look at, there's none in this boring category. We're going to break that right here with The Exterminator, with Don Adams. If you think about this episode, the gang teams up with Don Adams, the exterminator, who's exterminating bugs for the horror movie legend, Lauren Chumley? Yeah, Lauren Chumley. Trying to remember his name. In this Hollywood mansion. And then throughout the episode, the horror movie legend is scaring these people in his haunted mansion. The premise of this episode sounds amazing. The execution is not so amazing. There were a few good scenes, like when the clown, was it a clown? It was something. It was like a face, a painting, like grabs the canister and pulls it in and laughs and then immediately goes back to stay face. I thought that was really cool. I thought the fish monster that was swimming throughout the pool was really cool. There was some good moments in here, but the animation is just, it felt off. It didn't feel crisp and clean like the other episodes. It felt sort of dark and just boring. And that's all I can say about this episode. It's the last episode in the DVD. So if I'm watching every episode and I get to this episode, I'm already checked out mentally. And then I get this weird ass animation. I get these boring jokes. Don Adams doesn't do it for me. It's just a boring episode. So if you like this episode, more power to you, but I did not enjoy this episode as much as the others. I will say that I like every one of these episodes. I love Scooby-Doo. I'm 28 and I still watch it. But when I say these episodes are boring, they're boring relative to all the other ones. Okay, final disc. Speaking of boring, this has got to be the most boring episode of all time. The Weird Winds of Winona. Let me tell you why this shit's boring to me. First off, the celebrity you would think that Speed Buggy and these other motherfuckers would match the energy of Scooby-Doo and the gang. They have a similar layout. They've got like a weird animal car thing, whatever, matches Scooby. They got Tinker matches Shaggy. This weird guy matches Fred, whatever. Debbie matches Daphne. It just doesn't work. These guys are so fucking boring to me. And I can't stand them. So these guys are boring. Mr. Duncan is boring. The ghosts in this episode are boring. The whole premise of this episode that there's weird winds going on, that's fucking boring. There's just so much boring shit in this episode. I can barely get through it. And I feel like when Shaggy's convincing Tinker, oh, work faster, we need to get out of this town. I felt like I needed to get out of this town. I need to get out of this episode. This episode's putting me to sleep. I cannot watch this shit anymore. So man, this episode is so boring. The one redeeming quality is Mr. Peabody. Just for that name alone, he gets a +1. But damn, this episode is so boring. I can't do it with this one. Okay. The Haunted Candy Factory with Cass Elliot. Now, I like this episode. The ghosts are a little generic. They're these green globs. Cass Elliott's pretty funny, but most of the jokes that she says or are directed to her are fat jokes. And initially it's pretty funny. It's like, oh yeah, you're laughing about being fat, whatever. Yeah, it's okay. And then they just keep doing it over and over and over and over and over. And by the time you get to the end of the episode, you're like, oh my God, another fat joke? You're killing me. But apart from that little nitpick with all the fat jokes, I do like the side characters. I like Mr. Franklin. I like the other henchman who's obviously the ghost or one of them. I like the way that they utilize candy in this episode. They are in a haunted candy factory, but when they use the jawbreakers to break down the door, when they use the licorice as rope to pull the gang out of a ventilation system, I thought that was really cool and interesting. The taffy, the whole gang gets stuck in taffy except for Scooby, and Scooby's like, hey, I'm here to help. And they're like, oh no, you're a coward, whatever. And then the next scene, Scooby's in the middle of the Laffy Taffy, like, how'd that motherfucker get in there? I thought that was pretty funny. So there's a lot of good times in this episode. Not amazing, but it works out well. Okay, final episode. Scooby-Doo meets Dick Van Dyke. And, you know, I've probably seen this episode the least of all these because it's the final episode in the first off, disc number 4, but also just in the entire DVD. But the more I think about this episode, the more I like it. Dick Van Dyke is definitely the upper echelon of celebrity guests. Now, Harlem Globetrotters are my favorite, but then it goes like Dick Van Dyke, Jonathan Winters, Don Knotts. Those are my all-time favorites. So Dick Van Dyke's synergy with Shaggy is amazing. These guys, they have so many jokes in this episode that this is probably the funniest episode for me. Now, the animation's a bit weird. The ghost is like this random strong man. So you see like a ghostly hand. You see him have a face in some scenes, and then you see him white face in the others. There's a really funny scene where they're on a caterpillar ride at this, haunted fair. And Dick Van Dyke's yelling at Shaggy like, hey, does that ghost have a ticket? Well, he better pay if he doesn't have a ticket. It always stuck with me. It's really funny. There's a lot of really funny moments in this episode. So I really like this episode. The whole fairground is probably the biggest limitation. You think that Dick Van Dyke's Barrel of Fun would be really fun, a really fun environment, but there's only so much you can do with it. And I felt like the environment itself was probably the biggest limitation in this episode. Everything else was amazing though. And when Shaggy's introducing Dick Van Dyke in the beginning of the episode, his voice cracks and he's like, the famous Dick Van Dyke joins us today. That always stuck with me. Really funny. I love this episode. So yeah, it's going in my amazing tier. Well, we did pretty well. I'm going to stop recording now. I think that's pretty solid analysis. I guess I'll have to watch this video and find out. Thank you for paying attention. And if you have a different tier list, please do share with me. Tell me what you like, what you don't like. You know, we can agree to disagree. This is just an opinion. So thank you for watching and take care.